Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Well, thank you all so much for being here.
What's your name, Prabhu?
I'm Ekachakra Pran.
Disciple of His Grace, Vaisheshika Prabhu.
Yes.
Oh, very nice. Very, very nice. Ekachakra is one of the wonderful places to visit when you go to Mayapur.
Yes. Oh, thank you. It's on the top of the list now. So before we dive into Srimad Bhagavatam, let's take a moment of introspection and reflection. So if you'd like to just sit up a little straighter than you were a second ago.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
Can you use the microphone? Speaker microphone, because I'm hard of hearing.
I can just speak louder if that's okay.
Okay, yeah, just speak louder.
Yeah, I like to speak loud. So we'll just take a moment to come into the present awareness before we read Srimad Bhagavatam. Take a nice deep breath and arrive here. Let all of your worries go and be present for the Srimad Bhagavatam. And take a moment to reflect on what the Srimad Bhagavatam means to you. Why is the Srimad Bhagavatam important in your life? Why are we about to read it together? It's known as the spotless Purana, the cream of all the Vedic literatures, the mature fruit of Srila Vyasadev's work. the answer to all questions, as we'll see in a few moments. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would read the Srimad Bhagavatam hundreds of times and cry in ecstasy on the pages. As we read together, see if you can muster up just a drop of that emotion of love for the literary incarnation of Krishna, the Srimad Bhagavatam. And to conclude our introspection, find your heart. Bhakti yoga is the yoga of love and gratitude, and the heart is the fountain of love and gratitude. So see if you can feel your heart beating, and try to create that feeling of love here. And hold your mantra in your heart. Hold Krishna in your heart. Thank you very much. So today we'll be reading from Canto 2, The Cosmic Manifestation, verses 49 and 50. Chapter 10. Srimad Bhagavatam is the answer to all questions. And the theme for today's class will be that questions are the answer, and that the quality of the questions that you ask will determine the quality of your life. So we'll keep that in mind as we read these verses. Kshatu koshara vestasya
Shatu koshara vestasya
samvado dhyatma samshritaha
Vado dhyatma samshrita
yadvasa bhagavams tasmai
Vasa bhagavam tasmai
prishtas tatvam uvachaha
Prastatvam uvacha
bruhi nastadidam saumya
Hinastamidam saumya
vidurasya vicheshtitam
Rasya vicheshtitam
bandhu tyaga nimittam cha
Dhyutyaga nimittam cha
yataiva gatavan punah
Haiva gatavan punah
kshatu koshara vestasya
Tu koshara vestasya
samvado dhyatma samshritaha
Vado dhyatma samshrita
yadvasa bhagavams tasmai
Vasa bhagavam tasmai
prishtas tatvam uvachaha
Prastatvam uvacha
bruhi nastadidam saumya
Hinastadidam saumya
vidurasya vicheshtitam
Vidurasya vicheshtitam
bandhu tyaga nimittam cha
Dhyutyaga nimittam cha
yataiva gatavan punaha.
Haiva gatavan punah
Would anyone like to chant?
Shatu koshara vestasya
Kshatu koshara vestasya
Vado dhyatma samshrita
samvado dhyatma samshritaha
Vasa bhagavam tasmai
yadvasa bhagavams tasmai
Prastatvam uvacha
prishtas tatvam uvachaha
Bruhinastadidam saumya
bruhi nastadidam saumya
Vidurasya vicheshtitam
vidurasya vicheshtitam
Bandhutyaga nimittam cha
bandhu tyaga nimittam cha
Thaiva gatavan punah
yataiva gatavan punaha. Kshatu koshara vestasya samvado dhyatma samshritaha yavadsa bhagavams tasmai Prishtas Tattvam Uvachaha Bruhi Nastadidam Saumya Vidurasya Vicheshtitam Bandhu Tyaga Nimittam Cha Yataiva Gatavan Punah. Chatu Kosharavistasya Samvado Dhyatma Samshritaha Yavatsa Bhagavam Stasmai Prishtas Tattvam Uvachaha Bruhi Nastadidam Saumya Vidurasya Vicheshtitam Bandhu Tyaga Nimittam Cha Yataiva Gatavan Punaha. Thank you. Synonyms: Kshatu of Vidura, Kausharave as that of Maitreya, Tasya there, Samvadaha news, Adhyatma in the matter of transcendental knowledge, Samshritaha full of, Yat which, Va anything else, Saha he, Bhagavan his grace, Tasmai unto him, Prishtaha inquired, Tattvam the truth, Uvacha answered, Ha in the past, Bruhi please tell, Naha unto us, Tat those matters, Idam here, Saumya O gentle one, Vidurasya of Vidura, Vicheshtitam activities, Bandhu Tyaga renouncing the friends, Nimittam the cause of, Cha also, Yata as, Eva also, Agatavan came back, Punaha again at home. Translation by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. Shaunaka Rishi said, "Let us know, please, what topics were discussed between Vidura and Maitreya, who talked on transcendental subjects, and what was inquired by Vidura and replied by Maitreya. Also, please let us know the reason for Vidura's giving up the connection of his family members and why he again came home. Please also let us know the activities of Vidura while he was in the places of pilgrimage." Purport. Sri Sutta Goswami was narrating the topics of the creation and destruction of the material world, but it appears that the rishis, headed by Shaunaka, were more inclined to hear of transcendental subjects, which are on a higher level than the physical. There are two classes of men, namely, those too addicted to the gross body and the material world, and others on the higher level who are interested more in transcendental knowledge. Srimad Bhagavatam gives facility to everyone, both to the materialist and to the transcendentalist. By hearing Srimad Bhagavatam in the matter of the Lord's glorious activities, both in the material world and in the transcendental world, men can derive equal benefit. The materialists are more interested in the physical laws and how they are acting, and they see wonders in those physical glamours. Sometimes, due to physical glamours, they forget the glories of the Lord. They should know definitely that physical activities and their wonders are all initiated by the Lord. The rose in the garden gradually takes its shape and color to become beautiful and sweet, not by a blind physical law, although it appears like that. Behind that physical law is the direction of the complete consciousness of the Supreme Lord. Otherwise, things cannot take shape so systematically. The artist draws a picture of a rose very nicely, with all attention and artistic sense, and yet it does not become as perfect as the real rose. If that is the real fact, how can we say that the real rose has taken its shape without intelligence behind the beauty? This sort of conclusion is due to a poor fund of knowledge. One must know from the above description of creation and annihilation that the Supreme Consciousness, being omnipresent, can take care of everything with perfect attention. That is the fact of the omnipresence of the Supreme Lord. Persons still more foolish than the gross materialists, however, claim to be transcendentalists and claim to have such supreme all-pervading consciousness, but offer no proof. Such foolish persons cannot know what is going on behind the next wall, yet they are falsely proud of possessing the cosmic, all-pervading consciousness of the Supreme Person. For them also, hearing of Srimad Bhagavatam is a great help. It will open their eyes to see that simply by claiming supreme consciousness, one does not become supremely conscious. One has to prove in the physical world that he has such supreme consciousness. The rishis of Naimisharanya, however, were above the gross materialists and the false transcendentalists, and thus they were always anxious to know the real truth in transcendental matters, as discussed by authorities. Om Jnana-timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Lankayate Girim Yat Kripatam Maham Vande Shri Gurum Dinatarinam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Parakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Tinamine Shri Varshabha Navi Devi Dayataya Kripadaye Krishna Sambandha Vijnana Dayane Prabhave Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Brinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. And all of you who are listening online, we feel your presence. Thank you very much. First, I'd like to ask for your blessings, hopefully to say something of value today. I'd like to ask for your blessings, and I'd like to beg forgiveness for any offenses I may make. My sole purpose of being here is to serve you and to bring pleasure to you and all the devotees and Srila Prabhupada. So as I mentioned, the topic of today's talk will be how questions are the answer. I'd like to show the value of asking better questions, bigger questions, and to help you become a master asker. And if we remember that the quality of our life depends on the quality of the questions that you ask. If we look at the animals, in animal life, they're simply asking the basic questions: where is food? Where is sex? Etc. And if we ask those same questions, we'll have a very animalistic life. But if we can raise the quality of our questions to things such as, what is the absolute truth? Who is Krishna? Why am I here? How can I be of service? Then our life will blossom beautifully. So I'll begin by explaining a little bit of my backstory so you know who I am. As Sanatana Goswami said in the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, of all forms of evidence for proving the truth, experience from one's own life is the strongest. I grew up in a Christian family, like millions, hundreds of millions of other people in this country, and billions across the world. And in school, I picked up some bad habits. As Prabhupada said, the public school system is like a slaughterhouse. But my saving grace was that I was curious and always asking questions, always asking bigger questions, and I like to read. I think that one quality, liking to read, is what saved my life, honestly. So I read the Bible, and I began my spiritual journey through the Bible with Jesus as the guru. But I fell into some bad association, rock and roll bands and classic American dream, which led me down some bad paths, and I picked up some sinful habits. I went to college in Boston and studied business and studied music, and there I found a little better association. I met with some musicians and hippies and yogis and Buddhists, and they got me into meditation and yoga. That's another theme, is that whoever we associate with, we become like. And I've definitely noticed that in my life. At every stage, my associates were forming my activities and my character. So in college, I began to practice Hatha Yoga. I began to teach some Hatha Yoga. And I realized that music was my highest calling, or at least I thought music was my highest calling, and a door into the transcendental world, into the spiritual world. After college, I moved to Nashville, Tennessee to be a professional musician, and it was a great struggle to survive on my own as a musician. Traveling long distances with bands of dacoits, and getting involved in all sorts of strange situations. But I was still curious, and every time I'd have time off, I'd go to the used bookstore and gather everything I could find about spiritual life, about world religions, about mysticism. I read hundreds of books, searching for the truth. And one of those books on the shelf of the used bookstore was Bhagavad Gita as it is. And I have no idea how that book got there. I like to imagine that some book distributor in the mid-'70s was doing Prabhupada's work and gave it to someone, and it took its journey across the country, sat on a shelf somewhere, and then eventually, so that I could receive it, it landed on this bookshelf in the used bookstore. I read Bhagavad Gita as it is, and that was a seed planted in my mind. It didn't fructify immediately. It didn't sprout immediately. I read it along with all these other books, and I put it away. I didn't go and search out the devotees, but that seed was planted in my brain. And because life was very difficult at that time, I was struggling paying for my rent. It was very tough. So I started calling out more sincerely to the Supreme Lord. I started writing songs, love songs to God, in whatever conception I had of God. Praying for him to reveal himself, praying for him to improve my life, to give me answers. And at that point, I also was reading about the secret of life, how our thoughts create our circumstances. Our thoughts become our words become our actions become our character, and our character becomes our destiny. So I started getting serious about the yogic path of purification, of clean mind, clean body, of truthfulness, realizing the cause and effect is connected everywhere all the time, and trying to improve myself, become a perfect person, or as close as I could, giving up bad habits, looking for better association, looking for the answers. And the Lord reciprocated. As I was singing these songs, praying for answers, I was invited to a kirtan in Nashville. And it just so happened that Krishna arranged that maybe the only devotee that was there in the city was there at the kirtan, a Prabhupada disciple named Gayatri Das. And I was sitting way across the room from him. He was playing the mridanga, or the cajon drum at the time. And for some reason, the singer said, "We need the cajon on the other side." So he picked up and he moved and sat right next to me. So for the whole time, we were right there interacting, singing the holy names back and forth. And afterwards, he came up to me and we immediately became best friends. And from that moment, barely a day has passed when we haven't been talking about spiritual life, talking about Krishna. And he took me under his wing. He gave me Srimad Bhagavatam. He gave me all of Prabhupada's books. We did kirtan together. We did prasadam together. He gave me gallons of his blood. He invested so much into me. At that time, I was challenging and I was not ready to accept. But he stuck with me, and thankfully, I was able to pierce this ignorance and begin to see the great value and truth of the Vedic philosophy. And at that point, we went and saw Indradyumna Swami and his traveling band in Nashville. They came through. And because I was a musician, and I asked them, how can I serve? How can I get involved? That's another one of the important questions, is how can I serve? That's been a main question of my journey that has helped me along. How can I serve? They said, well, you can play bass. So they invited me to travel with them, first to the Sadhu Sangha in North Carolina, and then to Poland for the Baltic Sea Coast tour, and then again to India. That was a really nice little story. When we were in Poland, we would work all morning, do Harinam, and then there'd be lunch. And one lunch, I was really hungry, first in line, waiting, and the person who was supposed to serve wasn't there. So instead of thinking like, oh man, where is he? I thought, well, I'll just serve. How can I be of service? So I sat down, I started serving the devotees, and it was an incredible experience seeing their smiling faces and getting to serve them prasadam. And then Indradyumna Swami came and saw me there, and he said, you know what, I'm going to serve too. So he sat down next to me and started serving, and we had a really nice conversation. And he asked me, so what's next for you? And I said, I don't know. What do you think? And he said, you should come to India. And then he smiled and he said, that's an order. So I took him very seriously. I canceled my fall work that I had, and I just booked a ticket to India. And then I spent a month in Vrindavan playing bass in the yatra, and spent another month in Govardhan, and that's where I met my Guru Maharaj. So I like to think that just by deciding to serve, it changed my whole trajectory of my life, and it brought me much closer to Krishna consciousness. And it was amazing that all of this happened just before the COVID lockdown. So it was like just in time. I couldn't have waited another month or another year. Just grabbed it. So, and then this question, how can I serve? I started asking my Guru Maharaj that. And at first it was just little things, but I kept at it. And now he's engaged me in very major services working on his new books. So that's one question. If there's only one thing that you take from this class, it's the question, how can I serve? And Srila Prabhupada, I believe, said in the Lilamrita, it stated that that's the one question that he asked his Guru Maharaj. And he received the order to print books, to write books. One simple order that he made his very heart and soul. He's made his very life. And that desire to print books is what created this entire movement and is what has spread Krishna consciousness across the world. When Srila Prabhupada had his first books, that's when he decided he was ready to travel to New York. The books were the basis. The distribution of his literatures and his books is what built many of our temples. So that one little desire to serve his guru and to fulfill his order is what has built this great movement. So let's see here. So in this verse, Saunaka Rishi is asking Sutta Goswami to explain the topics that were discussed between Vidura and Maitreya. Up until this point in the chapter, Sutta Goswami was describing the material creation. And here, Saunaka Rishi decides to change the subject, decides to go for a more transcendental subject matter. So similarly, in our lives, we can change the subject by asking a better question. What kind of conversations are you engaged in your life? Are your associates discussing material things, perhaps even gossip or criticisms of other people? Or are they discussing transcendental subject matters like Srimad Bhagavatam and Krishna? Using the tool of a question, if you look at a question mark, it looks like a hook. You can hook somebody and lead the conversation by asking a question. One little question can change the whole trajectory of a discussion or of a life. Say you walk into someone's house and the 24-hour news is blaring. It's breaking news. It's actually breaking your heart. It's actually breaking your spirit. But if you ask them, can you turn that off? Oh, I can turn that off. Or if you ask them, oh, I see you have Srimad Bhagavatam. Have you read it recently? What's your realization? That little question will change the whole environment. The channel that we are watching or listening to will determine what is going into our heart and into our soul. Similarly to how water goes down the drain and ends up in the ocean, sound vibration goes into our ear and ends up in our heart. So be very careful about what you're listening to. And you always have the power to change the channel. You're holding the remote control of your own life. And how many channels are there? At least 8,400,000. And it might take lifetimes, but whatever you want to listen to, whatever kind of desires you have in your heart, Krishna will fulfill that and give you that body, will give you that channel. So it's like today on television, there really are 8 million channels, but it's all nonsense until you come to the channel of Krishna consciousness. And thank goodness we have the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's clearly the best channel. We don't have to wonder what's the best channel. All of the acharyas have told us it's Srimad Bhagavatam. Krishna himself has told us it's Srimad Bhagavatam. Srila Prabhupada has told us on many occasions that it's Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita as an introduction. If you're not quite ready, if it's intimidating, the big shelf full of books, start with Bhagavad Gita. It's a good introduction to the philosophy. If we look at our sampradaya, all of their official portraits, starting from Brahma, what is he holding? He's holding the book. We look at the Goswamis. What are they doing? They're writing books. If we look at Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he's posing with his books. He wrote hundreds, at least 100 books. This Herculean life of writing books. We look at the other acharyas. Srila Prabhupada, he's posing with his books. He's always stressing the importance of his books. He's waking up at midnight every day, living on minimal sleep, minimal food, just living on the ecstasy of translating Srimad Bhagavatam, the fruit of the Vedic tree, the essence of all philosophy and poetry is Srimad Bhagavatam. So we know which channel is the best. We just need to develop the taste. Some people say there's not enough time. They don't have enough time to read Srimad Bhagavatam, but it's actually a matter of taste. We all have the same amount of time. How many hours do you have in a day? How many hours do you have in a day? 24, yes. How many hours do you have in a day? 24, that's right. Anybody listening from across the ocean, how many hours do you have in Europe? I believe it's 24. We all have the same amount of time. The question is, how will you use that time? We make time for prasadam. We make time for this and that. But if we develop this real deep taste for Srimad Bhagavatam, then we'll make time. Perhaps we will even say, oh, it's prasadam time? Well, I'm more hungry for Srimad Bhagavatam. Maybe if afterwards, maybe I'll take prasadam if I can finish my pages for the day. And that's another point about books. Books are beloved by human society. They always have been, and they always will be. There's something special about books. Books change the world. Books are seeds that go out into the world, and then, like time bombs, they explode when they're ready. Even if you look at mundane examples, such as The Origin of Species, it's a book that had an idea called The Theory of Evolution. And most people have never even read this book, have never even seen the book, but it has become pervasive in the overall society, where the idea, the theory of evolution has now become an accepted axiom, even in schools and among most people across the Western world accept this idea just at face value without really even questioning it. Similarly, when you look at the American Revolution, there was a book called Common Sense that it was just a pamphlet that was distributed to all the people in the country. And that book is what changed the ideology of the people so that they said, yeah, you know what, we should have a revolution. We should be our own country. So similarly, just by talking about Srimad Bhagavatam, by spreading Srimad Bhagavatam, by making people familiar with Srimad Bhagavatam, with the characters, with the ideas, with the lessons, with the stories, we can plant this seed of Krishna consciousness in the world and spread it like wildfire, so that instead of Harry Potter selling 100 million copies, it could be Srimad Bhagavatam, something of value, selling 100 million copies. And just as another side point here, the Bhadra Purnima campaign is just getting started. Every year, we have a campaign to distribute a certain number of Srimad Bhagavatam sets. Last year, we distributed 20-something thousand sets of Srimad Bhagavatam, which was smashing our goal, and I'm sure very pleasing to Srila Prabhupada and all the pure devotees. Because Srimad Bhagavatam is beloved by pure devotees. This year, the goal is 25,000 sets. So I encourage you to make a goal in your own heart to read Srimad Bhagavatam and also to distribute it at least to one person in your life. And the more you read it, the more you'll want to distribute it. And the more you distribute it, the more you'll want to read it. It's this endless loop of pure bliss until the point where you are crying in ecstasy when you're reading the Srimad Bhagavatam. So to come back to the verse here, Vidura was a pure devotee, and he was counseling Duryodhana in the Kuru assembly. War was brewing. War is always brewing in the material world. And still I think it's a nice place to live most of the time. So war was brewing between the Pandavas and the Kurus, and Vidura was asked for his counsel. And as a pure devotee, he gave perfect, shastric, reasonable counsel that was relished by a few in the assembly, like Bhishma Dev. But others, like Duryodhana and his father Dhritarashtra, rejected his advice. Even sometimes they agree, oh yes, this is the correct thing, but they say, but I cannot follow it. It is my character, it is my fate to be this way. So don't be like that. And then Duryodhana insulted Vidura. And Vidura put down his bow and he just left. He left the assembly, he left the kingdom, and he went out on pilgrimage. Instead of asking, why me, which is a general tendency among living entities to think, why is this happening to me? He wasn't sorry at all. It's stated he wasn't sorry about it at all. He just went out and instead of asking, why me, you can ask, what's the lesson here? When something bad happens, what can I learn from this experience? That's a more empowering question when things go wrong. So he went out on pilgrimage and was completely absorbed in spiritual life and in Krishna consciousness. So Saunaka Rishi wanted to learn about the talks between Maitreya and Vidura. And this question, you see how question can lead the conversation. This question ends the second canto and begins the third canto. Similarly, the first canto was ended by a question, and the second canto begins with a question. So in your life, a question can really end a chapter and begin a new chapter. And there's a few questions I'd like to recommend that we think about, and that you could even ask every morning or at any time in the day. An important question is, what is my purpose in life? If you ask that question, it'll be like a guiding light, a compass. If you think about a ship on the ocean, if it knows its purpose, if it knows where it's going, 99.9% of the time it will get there. But if it has no destination and no purpose, it's very likely that there will be a mutiny on board. It's very likely that it'll end up derelict on some beach somewhere. And our lives are no different. If we're clear on our purpose, what are we all about? What are we doing here? What's our work? Then that question can inform our daily decisions and can lead us in the right direction. I already mentioned, how can I be of service? That's a great question to have in your front pocket. Sometimes you might meet a great personality and they ask do you have any questions for me? And if you always have this question, you can never go wrong. How can I serve you? How can I be of service? And as it's mentioned in Bhagavad Gita, Tadvidi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninas tattvadarshinaha. When approaching a spiritual personality, a spiritual master, asking a question, a relevant question, is one of the three things that Krishna recommends. He also recommends being very humble, not being puffed up and challenging, but to approach with folded palms and to render some service. Ask relevant questions, render service in a humble mood, and then the spiritual personality's heart will open and their contents will pour out on you. So that's a very important question. How can I be of service? I mentioned what's the lesson here? That's a great way to turn around any challenging situation. And then you actually can learn from it. And the last question, coming from the picture, is what's the best use of my time right now? So it's important to have this macro view and this micro view as well. What's the best use of my time right now? And I'd like to recommend that oftentimes the answer to that question will be read the Bhagavatam. And to wrap up this talk, so we have a few minutes for questions, the Bhagavatam is the answer to all questions. That's the title of this chapter. Because the Bhagavatam is a collection of the biggest questions, of the most important questions. A lot of questions in the Bhagavatam. What's the highest good for all humanity? What's the duty of a man at the time of death? What benediction do you choose? This is the Supreme Lord asking his great devotees, what benediction do you choose? That's a good question, and we should have an answer ready if that happens to us at some point. And a lot of the devotees say, I just want to serve you, life after life. Just give me your devotional service. So that's a good answer for that question. And so on and so forth. Vamana asks for 3 steps of land. Krishna asks, why are we worshiping Indra? And the Bhagavad Gita starts with a question as well. Dhritarashtra Uvacha. What did my sons and the sons of Pandu do on the field of Kurukshetra? So a question launched the whole Bhagavad Gita. Krishna, what is my duty? These questions reveal answers that can change our life. So just to conclude, it's very important to read Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita every day. Make some time, get a do not disturb sign, put it on your door. And just like we count our japa, 16 rounds at least, have an at least amount of pages you read every day. That'll keep you moving. And that's the Goswamis recommend numerical strength. So if you choose on even 1 page a day, make that decision in your heart. I'll read at least 5 or 10 pages a day of Srimad Bhagavatam. Before you know it, you'll be cruising through. If you get up to 41 pages a day, you'll read the whole big Bhagavatam every year. And then begin to discuss, be an advocate for Srimad Bhagavatam in your temple, in your community. Just talk about Srimad Bhagavatam more. Begin to distribute it more. That word advocate has the same root as uvacha, the vak, speech. So we just talk about it. We're just chanting about Srimad Bhagavatam. And those seeds, those mantras will begin to plant, will begin to grow in your associates. Before you know it, you'll be distributing Srimad Bhagavatam in your communities. And one final thing I wanted to say before I concluded is I wanted to thank everyone in New York for such a wonderful Ratha Yatra. I really appreciated all of your hard work and all of your service to bring the holy names and to bring the mercy of Lord Jagannath and Srila Prabhupada to all the people of this great city. So thank you very much. And we have 2 or 3 minutes if there's any reflections, something you heard that you can use in your life, or any questions to expand the discussion. Anybody have any questions? Please feel free. Or a reflection is easier. Anything you heard, just reflect it back, something that's useful. Maharaj.
Hare Krishna. One thing that occurred to me, since we don't have a lot of time to get anything into any depth, Prabhupada uses this analogy in the text about flowers. And it occurred to me that, how many kinds of flowers are there in the world? How many kinds? There's just, and they're so different. They all smell differently, they're different sizes, their colors are different, yet they grow in the same dirt, So somehow or other each flower seed pulls what it needs out of that dirt to make the kind of flower that it is, And you would think well, what's the purpose of having so many different kinds of flowers? Is it truly that bees are attracted because there's different kinds of flowers? I mean, probably they would still go to flowers if they weren't different, amazing colors, you know. You know, it's one of those things that has no real scientific explanation, you know. But if you have another explanation as kind of the artistic sense of the Supreme Lord, then it actually starts to have some sense. And it is kind of amazing just to think about, you know, how each different kind of plant, or in this case flower, lives in the same dirt as the flower right next to it, you know, and they're completely two different kinds of flowers. And they pull out of the water and out of the air and create a completely different thing out of it. Anyway, that's just one reflection.
Yeah, that's a very interesting reflection. Thank you, Maharaj. And that brings us to the conclusion of our class today. Thank you all so much for the opportunity to speak.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.